The heavy oak doors of the courtroom creaked open with a sound that made even the gavel pause midair, and in walked a woman whose very presence seemed to slice through the stale air like a blade. She wore a fitted crimson blazer, her natural curls defiant like her posture, chin raised high as if daring anyone in that room to look away from her. Every whisper in the room stopped, not out of respect, but the way a crowd goes silent before a storm hits. "She doesn't belong here," muttered an older white man to his companion, his tone dripping with venomous disbelief. Officer Jennings, a thick-jawed man with a history of aggressive removals, folded his arms across his chest like he was guarding a national secret. His eyes narrowed as he leaned toward the prosecutor and said through clenched teeth, "I know her type. Loud, righteous, always looking for a scene. She shouldn't even be in this courtroom," added a woman in pearls, her accent rich with generational prejudice, eyes rolling as she clutched her purse tighter. The judge cleared his throat and tapped his gavel lightly, not daring to challenge the sudden shift in energy. "Silence in the court, please." But silence wasn't an option anymore, not when that woman, with nothing but quiet strength in her steps, sat confidently in the front row as if she'd claimed her throne. "She's here to cause a mess," someone hissed from the gallery, like they always do. The woman turned, hearing the slur wrapped in that vague "they," and locked eyes with the man who said it, her gaze sharp enough to draw blood. Officer Jennings stepped forward, his boots hitting the floor with force, the way some men use noise to compensate for weakness. "You need to leave," he growled, voice low but threatening, like a storm cloud just before it bursts. She didn't move a muscle, just looked up at him and said, "This is a public courtroom. Last I checked, I'm still a citizen." He reached for her arm, rough and entitled, like he was dragging out trash instead of touching a person. Her voice dropped into a deadly calm. "Touch me again," she whispered, not flinching, "and I promise you this won't end well for you." Officer Jennings chuckled bitterly, leaning closer so only she could hear. "You think someone's gonna care what happens to you?" She smiled with a slow, dangerous certainty. "Oh, someone already does. You just don't know who yet." The room held its breath as Officer Jennings' hand hovered over her shoulder, fingers twitching like he was weighing the consequences against his impulse. The woman, her name was Asha Monroe, though none of them cared to ask, slowly stood up, and even that simple act felt like a revolution. Her eyes never left his as she adjusted the hem of her blazer, her movements deliberate, like a queen refusing to be rushed by a servant. "You're making a scene," he spat, the corner of his mouth curled in that way bullies often do when they believe the law is stitched into their skin. "No, you made the scene the moment you decided that a black woman with a voice was a threat," Asha replied, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. A hush fell so thick that even the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate, blades slowing as if trying to hear every syllable she dared to speak. From the bench, Judge Callahan, a man whose spine bent more for tradition than for justice, cleared his throat again, clearly uncomfortable. "Ms. Monroe, I will not tolerate disruptions," he warned, but his voice was soft, almost apologetic, like he wasn't sure who he was addressing anymore. "Disruption?" she echoed, voice rising like a wave. "You mean like the disruption of my brother's life? Like the fabricated charges, the lost evidence, the broken ribs?" The gallery erupted into murmurs again, and someone in the back, a blonde woman with a tight bun and tighter opinions, scoffed, "Here we go with the race card." Asha spun around, eyes locking onto the woman like a predator spotting a weakness, and with a chilling smile she said, "You're damn right I'm playing it. It's the only card you've ever dealt me. Jennings lunged forward again, this time grabbing her arm, but before she could react, a loud slam echoed as the courtroom doors burst open. All heads whipped around, and there stood a tall, stern-looking man in a dark suit, a Bluetooth headset in one ear, phone still in his hand, his badge clipped to his belt. Federal. He held up the phone, screen still glowing, and said in a voice that silenced even the judge, "Let her go." Jennings froze mid-grab, suddenly very aware of the man's suit, the tone, and most importantly, the number flashing on that screen. That call just came from the West Wing, the agent added coolly, his gaze fixed on Jennings like he already knew the kind of man he was dealing with. Asha smiled, but it wasn't sweet. It was the smile of someone who had waited a long time for a reckoning. "Now," she whispered, her voice steady, "are we done pretending this courtroom is neutral ground?" For a full 5 seconds, the entire courtroom stood frozen in stunned silence, like someone had pressed pause on the entire American justice system. The judge fumbled with his gavel, tapping it once, then twice, as if hoping the sound alone could reverse what had just happened. "A federal call doesn't override my court," Judge Callahan snapped, voice cracking slightly, not from authority, but fear of what he could no longer control. "You're absolutely right, Your Honor," the federal agent said with a slow, razor-edged calm. "But this isn't just your court anymore. Not when you let racial bias run your docket." The crowd gasped, scandalized, as though the agent had just slapped the flag across the face, and murmurs twisted into outrage faster than wildfire and dry brush. The blonde woman in the gallery stood up and yelled, "This is our country, not theirs. They don't get to walk in and take over with phone calls and sob stories." Asha turned to her slowly, her voice like a storm tightening in the sky. "Say it. Say what you really mean. You don't like that I have power, that we ever dare to demand it." The woman hissed, "You people are always victims. Maybe if your kind knew how to obey the law, you wouldn't be in this mess." There was a sharp intake of breath from several seats, and the bailiff actually took a step back, as if bracing for lightning. "My brother obeyed the law," Asha shouted now, rage breaking free like a dam splitting open. "He obeyed every rule, every command, and you still left him bleeding in a cell for a crime he didn't commit." Officer Jennings, still red-faced, stepped forward again, trying to regain control, barking, "That's enough, ma'am. Sit your black ass down before someone does it for you." Gasps exploded across the room like gunfire, and someone in the back actually stood up and yelled, "Did he just say what I think he said?" The agent stepped between Asha and Jennings now, hands subtly resting near his hip like he was prepared for any escalation. "You just buried your career, officer," the agent said coldly, "and if you so much as breathe in her direction again, I'll personally walk you out in cuffs." Asha, trembling with fury, looked Jennings dead in the eye and said, "This is what you built, brick by brick. A system that protects the uniform, not the people." A man in a MAGA cap stood up and shouted, "You think you're special just 'cause you got the White House on speed dial? That don't make you right." "No," Asha replied sharply, voice ringing like a bell. "But it makes you nervous, and that's a start." The courtroom, now unraveling at the seams, buzzed with chaos. Phones were out, cameras clicked despite the no recording signs, and somewhere in the hallway, a reporter was already live tweeting the scandal in real time. Asha stood her ground in the middle of the storm, but inside her chest, her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. This wasn't just about today. This was years of silence crashing down like a cathedral set on fire. From behind the bench, Judge Callahan leaned over to whisper to the clerk, Get the sheriff and tell him to make this whole thing disappear before the press eats us alive. But it was too late. The federal agent raised his voice and said, "We're unsealing the evidence file from the Monroe case, effective immediately. Orders came in 30 seconds ago." A single document folder was handed over, thick with dust and secrets, labeled in red. Case 49302, K. Monroe. Asha froze. Her brother, Khalil. She hadn't seen that name in an official file in years, only in nightmares and gravestones. "I thought this was sealed under court order," Callahan stammered. But the agent cut him off. "Sealed under your court, not anymore." The folder snapped open and the room leaned in, oxygen thinning as each page turned over evidence long buried. Photos showed bruises not mentioned in police reports, timestamps that didn't match the arrest record, missing body cam footage, and, worst of all, a written confession from another suspect that had never seen daylight. The gallery erupted. Some were shouting, others just held their mouths open in disbelief. "They covered it up," someone whispered, horrified. "They fucking buried him alive." Officer Jennings tried to bolt, but two U.S. Marshals were already blocking the exit, one hand casually resting on his shoulder, like gravity itself was reminding him, "You're not going anywhere." Asha looked at the photos, her hands shaking, but her voice stronger than it had ever been. "He begged you to listen. He begged you." A woman in the jury box, previously silent, suddenly stood and pointed at the judge, shouting, "You sentenced him in 3 minutes. I was there. You never even looked at the evidence." The judge turned pale, like a ghost exposed to daylight. "That's enough." He tried, but no one was listening anymore. Reporters stormed in through the now wide-open doors, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing like a war zone, and Asha was at the center. Not as a victim, but as a reckoning made flesh. "This isn't justice," she said slowly, looking straight into a lens. "This is rot, and I'm here to burn it down." By the time the evening news aired, Asha's face was on every screen in America, her voice echoing through kitchens, gas stations, hospital break rooms, and prison day rooms like a siren of justice. Clips of her confrontation with Officer Jennings, her fearless speech in the courtroom, and the unsealing of her brother's case were looped endlessly across every platform, framed as the moment that shook the system. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse within hours, hundreds at first, then thousands, holding signs that read, "Khalil Monroe deserved to live, and we will not be silent." The mayor, pressed by panicked donors and angry voters, called a press conference and tried to distance himself. "We believe in due process. This is an isolated incident." But Asha's words had already sunk in deep. It wasn't isolated. It never had been. It was stitched into the bones of the courthouse, into the ink of old rulings, into the silence that had followed every broken Black life. Meanwhile, Judge Callahan sat in his chambers, phone buzzing nonstop, reporters calling him a racist relic, activists demanding his resignation, and federal investigators opening an inquiry into his past rulings. Officer Jennings was officially suspended by sunrise, but not before being caught on camera screaming outside the station, "This country's gone to hell. They let animals run the show now." That footage went viral in under 10 minutes. The comments section was a war zone. One anchor on national television asked, "What does it say about our justice system when it takes a phone call from the White House to stop a woman from being dragged out of court for demanding the truth?" At home, Asha sat on her couch with the blinds drawn, her phone blinking constantly with messages from lawyers, strangers, celebrities. Even her old high school history teacher, who wrote, "I'm sorry I never taught you how deep this went." Tears came, but they were brief. She wiped them away like ash from a battlefield. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself, not out of shame, but transformation. Her grief had hardened into clarity. Her pain turned blade sharp. There was a knock at the door. She opened it to find the same federal agent, now out of uniform, a file in his hand and something urgent in his eyes. "There's more," he said, voice low. "It wasn't just your brother. This goes all the way to the state prosecutor's office, and we think someone inside leaked the order to bury the confession." Asha didn't blink. "Then we dig them out. All of them." Outside, the crowd was still chanting, not her name, his, Khalil's. And in that sound, she felt a pulse of something ancient and alive. Not revenge, not even justice. Reckoning. The sun rose blood red over the city, casting long, jagged shadows on the shattered steps of the courthouse where justice had long gone to die. Crowds surrounded the building like a siege, drums beating, chants echoing off marble walls that had never heard truth spoken so loudly. Inside, the emergency hearing had begun. Judge Callahan, pale and shaken, sat beneath the great seal of justice that now looked like a hollow emblem of rot and silence. Asha walked into the chamber, not as a witness, not as a victim, but as the storm itself. Every eye turned, every breath held. The federal agent stood beside all her, thick new files in his arms. Evidence of corruption, collusion, and cover-ups that stained decades of rulings and left hundreds wrongfully convicted. "I want the names," Asha said, voice slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "Every judge, every officer, every damn prosecutor who touched this filth and called it justice." Callahan tried to speak, to save himself, but Asha didn't let him. "You let my brother rot in a cell," she hissed, "while you played God with black lives and called it law." He snapped. "You don't know what it's like to keep order in a city on the brink of chaos? You think truth wins in the real world? Truth is a noose, and I made sure it didn't tighten around my kind." Gasps filled the room. Reporters scribbled like maniacs. The microphones caught every word. It was over for him. "Your kind." Asha stepped forward, fire in her blood. "You mean the men who drink whiskey behind closed doors while young black boys choke on cement?" He tried to rise, but the marshals were already at his side, slapping cuffs on his frail wrists as he screamed, "This court is a lie without men like me." "No," the agent replied, "this court is a lie because of men like you." As Callahan was dragged away, other names poured out of the files, high-ranking officials, detectives, state attorneys, all tied together in a conspiracy stitched with hate, fear, and greed. The crowd outside exploded when they heard firecrackers, screams, tears. Some dropped to their knees. Others danced. One elderly woman just held up a photo of her dead son and whispered, "It's happening. Finally." That night, the governor declared a full-scale investigation. Statues were defaced, streets renamed, protests became movement. But Asha didn't rest. She stood where it all began, outside the jail where Khalil had taken his last breath, and placed a single candle by the wall, surrounded by photos of others like him. "He's free now," she whispered, voice breaking, "and so are we." Behind her, someone asked if she planned to run for office. She didn't answer. She just looked to the sky, where sirens no longer screamed like wolves in the dark. They had been heard, and this time they would not be silenced again.